One of the bravest and brightest legends to ever enter Hollywood, Jodie Foster is the eternal spirit of American film. Both the unwavering Clarice Starling in The Silence of the Lambs and the child prodigy, who astounded the entire world in Taxi Driver. She left her mark on the history of film as well as on the core of world culture. From a family characterized by sacrifice and absence, she rose to become a symbol of intelligence and fortitude, the proud recipient of 2 Academy Awards, and a fearless voice for generations. She transcended the realm of acting with her unparalleled intelligence, piercing presence, and unwavering dignity. She turned into the narrative itself, a living example of how brilliant people can be at any age. However, beneath that stunning splendor is a battlefield of horrific wounds, moments spent on the brink of death and terrors that haunted her for 4 decades. A significant turning point at the age of 62 left fans completely stunned, just when everyone thought the storm had passed and that she had finally found peace again. You will be devastated by what has happened to Jodie Foster. As a tribute to a life full of storms, remember to hit the like button before we start. However, Jodie Foster's story did not start on the red carpet or at the Oscars. It started with a mother fighting to keep 4 children together in a small Los Angeles home, heartbreak, and a father who disappeared before she was even born. Jodie, the youngest of Cindy, Connie, and Buddy, was born on November 19, 1962. While her mother was still pregnant, her father, Lucius Foster, a former decorated Air Force colonel who is now a real estate broker, left. Evelyn Brandy Foster was left to bear the harsh burden of raising 4 children by herself, struggling every day in a modest home where the only source of wealth was sacrifice. Her father's absence left her with an unspoken silence that followed her throughout her entire childhood. Brandy gave her kids something more valuable than money: intellect, bravery, and resilience, because she was determined to keep them from despairing. And like lightning in a bottle, Jodie took it all in. She was able to speak in complete sentences at the age of 9 months. She taught herself to read by the age of 3. She devoured books well above her level by the time she was 4. Her genius astounded the doctors. The word gifted was whispered by teachers. And when this little girl spoke with unusual authority and calm, even her older siblings paid attention. As though fate were rewriting her identity, her nickname Jodie, which she had taken from a family friend named Joe, quickly took the place of her given name, Alicia Christian Foster. However, brilliance always has a cost. Rehearsals and auditions replaced what should have been playground laughter. Childhood was passing before it had even started. Years later, Jodie would come clean and say, "I never really had a childhood. Before I understood what play meant, I was working." The devastating reality that genius had been born from sacrifice too great for a child to bear was made clear by that confession. Jodie was selected for a sunscreen commercial by a talent scout in 1965, when she was only 3 years old. Across America, the picture of a young girl with a puppy pulling at her swimsuit became recognizable. But there was a terrible reality hidden behind that adorable photo. She was now the primary provider and not just a child. Her innocence subtly vanished as she made appearances in almost 30 commercials over the course of the following 18 months. She out-earned her mother by the time she was 4 years old, necessitating the creation of a trust fund to store her earnings. Instead of chasing kites in the park, the young girl was burdened with the crushing weight of survival. She made her television debut with Mayberry RFD when she was 5 years old, and by the time she was 13, she had made appearances in more than 50 shows. Her professionalism astounded the producers, who were surprised that a child could endure fatigue and fevers without complaining. However, the reality was harsh. This was a necessary discipline, not a choice. Even as a young child, Foster herself subsequently remarked, "I was always the adult in the room." This was Jodie Foster's childhood, a tale of a child whose survival required genius, a home characterized by sacrifice, and a fatherless tale. Play gave way to performance, innocence to duty, and the gift of genius to both her crown and her cross. Jodie Foster was subjected to extraordinary demands by Hollywood in 1972. She was asked to work with a trained lion on the set of Napoleon and Samantha. What was supposed to be a moment of magic abruptly became a terrifying event. Due to the animal's unpredictable movements, she fell and suffered injuries to her side and back. The crew hurried to protect her and secured the set right away. In addition to causing her physical suffering, the accident left her with lingering anxieties that plagued her dreams for years. Later, Jodie would recollect quietly, I had nightmares about that lion for a long time. Without seeing it, I was unable to close my eyes. Only 3 days later, though, she was determined to see the movie through to the end and returned to the set covered in bandages. It was both heartbreaking and inspirational to see that person standing in front of the camera while still recovering. Hollywood praised her professionalism, but underneath the praise was a harsh reality. This was not a conscious act of bravery. It was the fortitude that the situation required. Another setback occurred during the filming of Tom Sawyer the following year. Jodie broke her wrist after falling during a stunt. Despite the excruciating pain, she persisted in playing the part. She persevered, hiding the pain behind a grin, and discovered how to turn adversity into achievement. Behind the camera was an actor who was going through far more than anyone should at such a young age. But the camera caught a vibrant Becky Thatcher. These weren't merely mishaps. They were subdued reminders that in Hollywood, show frequently came before safety. The cost of a career molded under the unrelenting studio lights was the emotional memory that persisted, even though the recovery took time. Then 1976 arrived, bringing with it the part that would make her enduring and enlarge her shadow. Jodie was chosen by director Martin Scorsese to play Iris in Taxi Driver, a character set in a complex and difficult narrative universe. Jodie was subjected to hours of psychological testing prior to filming, as specialists examined her capacity to bear such a burden. Strict safeguards were enforced by the California Labor Board, and her older sister Connie filled in to protect her from the script's most delicate scenes. The toll, however, was real. The clothing choices were more unsettling to her than the dialogue or the story's intensity. Some pushed her to the brink of tears by interfering with her comfort and well-being. "I would hold back tears because I had to wear those ridiculous costumes," she acknowledged years later. The world praised her genius when the movie came out. Critics praised Jodie Foster as an old soul in a young performer, astonished by the depth she brought to the screen, and she was nominated for an Academy Award. Although Taxi Driver brought glory, it also left behind shadows that would never completely go away. Every step of Jodie Foster's ascent to the top of Hollywood was accompanied by sacrifice, fear, and exhaustion rather than a golden staircase. It was evident that childhood was already gone after the storm of her adolescence, when darker films like The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane demanded a maturity far beyond her age, and Disney comedies like Freaky Friday made her smile at the box office. She was praised for her versatility, but at a high cost. Adolescence was traded for parts that made her spirit old before her time. Her talent brought her to France for Moi and Fleur Bleue in the late 1970s, and to Italy for Casoto. She sang songs for foreign audiences, acted in languages other than her native tongue, and portrayed orphans and scammers in films such as Candle Shoe. Although there was applause, the teenager who was far from home was lonely. She exuded an air of maturity, and she later acknowledged that her early years had made her feel older than she actually was, as though her youth had been stolen and replaced with a compelled fortitude. Then came the moment that should have defined her life, not tragedy. Ronald Reagan's 1981 incident, which was carried out by someone who subsequently claimed to have a connection to her. Jodie had nothing to do with it, but she suddenly found herself ensnared in a never-ending cycle of headlines. She was protected by the federal government while attending Yale, with agents outside her dorm room, reinforced glass in her windows, and a phone line that was directly connected to the FBI. She once admitted that she almost dropped out of school 17 times in that first year due to the overwhelming fear and intrusion. Danger found her even on stage. She was so shaken by a security incident in the audience that she avoided theater for 40 years. Jodie lived in extreme, confining security at a time when others were finding freedom. Her youth reshaped by forces that were well beyond her control. Her thesis on Toni Morrison demonstrated her talent outside of the screen, and she graduated with honors in 1985. Hollywood, however, had abandoned the project. She was classified as a commercial risk by casting directors. Almost nothing came out of 63 auditions. Her savings shrank to nearly nothing, and completed films were put on hold. She went to therapy 3 times a week, not out of weakness, but because she had to in order to survive. It was cruel for someone who was once praised as a prodigy to be told she was done before turning 30. The accused then appeared. When studios claimed she wasn't, director Jonathan Kaplan battled for her for 7 months. Every standing ovation and every Oscar was marred by the specters of fear, loss, and unrelenting pressure. Nevertheless, she stood, not unharmed but unbroken through every storm. She was never a princess. It was a living example of how greatness can emerge from suffering, endured, changed, and carried with dignity, rather than from comfort. Jodie Foster's victories on the Oscar stage were breathtaking. But as the spotlight faded and the applause subsided, she yearned for a quiet, steady love, something the industry was never able to provide. When she met Sydney Bernard, a production coordinator whose serene strength and unwavering kindness felt like a safe harbor after decades of storms, on the set of Summersby in 1993, that longing found its answer. Their connection was quiet and private, in contrast to the flashing cameras and red carpets. It was intimate, silent, and incredibly genuine. After years of criticism and praise that frequently felt insincere, Jodie finally met someone who saw her as a woman seeking peace, rather than as a prodigy or legend. She once reflected quietly, "Sydney grounded me. When everything else felt like noise, she gave me a sense of home." Those years glistened like sunlight on still water for Bernard as well. Friends recalled how her eyes glowed whenever Jodie walked into a room, and how she described her as a partner she greatly admired rather than as an icon. Sydney once said in private that Jodie was the most fiercely intelligent, yet the most tender soul I had ever known. Together, they crafted a world that was nearly imperceptible to those outside, yet emanated warmth within their walls. Quiet kitchens filled with the smell of simple meals were filled with their laughter. Their happiness was reflected in the customs of love, such as reading together in low light, taking late-night dog walks, and making plans for the future in whispers. Jodie was a two-time Oscar winner to the rest of the world, but to Sydney and their kids, she was just mom. According to Jodie, the birth of their first son, Charlie, in 1998 was the most profound joy of my life. In order to safeguard their haven, she carried him herself and entered the hospital using a false identity. Kid arrived 3 years later, bringing with him an eternal sense of completeness. Through sleepless nights, first steps, bedtime stories, and the lovely chaos of family life that turned their secret home into a world of love, Sydney was always there. However, Jodie found motherhood to be both a blessing and a challenge. She paid schools thousands of dollars annually to prevent paparazzi from taking pictures of her kids. In order to protect them, she refused to disclose the children's father's identity, employed multiple layers of legal protection, and frequently changed her email address. She once firmly stated, "My sons will know the truth when they are ready, not unless the public requests it." Their devotion was shrouded in secrecy for 14 years, 2 women lovingly raising children, protecting their joy like a delicate flame from an unrelenting wind. Jodie later recalled simply, "We were a family. That was all that mattered." However, even the most robust walls can become prisons. Over time, the silence they had chosen to preserve their love grew to be too much to handle. Suffocation replaced the sense of safety. Once easy conversations became hesitant. Once heavy laughter became infrequent. Sydney, longing for a life less hidden, yearned for sunlight, while Jodie, consumed by her intense need for privacy, built the walls higher. Neither was incorrect, but the gap became insurmountable. They split up in 2008, having spent almost 10.5 years together. It was devastating for Jodie. She subsequently acknowledged that the separation made her feel as if a whole phase of her life had been ripped away. Sydney experienced a more subdued but equally devastating heartbreak. The silence had finally prevailed, but the love itself had not. Nevertheless, despite the sadness, their unwavering devotion to Charlie and Kit kept them together rather than romance. They opted for co-parenting over estrangement and for tenderness over resentment. Jodie once remarked, "Our children kept us together in the ways that really mattered, no matter what." Theirs was a tragedy of circumstance rather than choice, a love story ruined by the gradual deterioration of secrecy rather than betrayal. It was a love that created a home, reared children, and provided solace from the outside world. But it was unable to withstand the constant pressure of silence. Perhaps the most profound human truth is that some of the most profound love stories are not ones that endure forever, but rather those that leave behind painful and shimmering scars that serve as reminders that love was real, bright and eternal in its own unique way, even when it was lost. Jodie was once again left standing in the shadows, keeping her kids close while ignoring the outside world after her 14-year relationship with Sidney Bernard ended. Her haven love had become a memory. However, dawn eventually triumphs over even the longest night, and a new dawn dawned in 2013, illuminated by the Golden Globes. Decades of silence were broken when Jodie Foster took the stage to accept the Cecil B. DeMille Award. She did not declare aloud, nor did she speak angrily. Rather, she spoke with the shaky elegance of someone who has been carrying a personal secret for too long. She smiled wryly and said, "I already did my coming out 1,000 years ago," before her voice became raw and memorable. Perhaps you too would value privacy above all else if you had to struggle for a life that felt real and had been a public figure since you were a toddler. The room froze in that instant. It was just another acceptance speech to many. It was freedom for Jodie. A life that had been kept under lock and key was abruptly illuminated. A year later, that light only got brighter. Jodie secretly wed the talented actress and photographer Alexandra Hedison in 2014. They didn't make headlines for their love. Under the guidance of two women who had experienced both success and heartbreak, it flourished in peaceful settings. Jodie's steel was tempered by Alexandra's gentleness, a steadiness that suggested refuge rather than spectacle. Jodie was free to live in the background and stop censoring her own truth for the benefit of a cruel industry for the first time. The moment when silence gave way to sunlight was not merely a marriage. It was an act of healing. Later, friends would remark that Alexandra gave Jodie peace, which she had never fully understood. With its brightly lit rooms and walls covered in Hedison's eerily stunning photographs, their Beverly Hills home evolved into more than just a residence. It served as a haven. The morning started with peaceful routines. Jodie reading in the corner, Alexander making coffee, and their dogs pacing the floor. Jodie's sons, Charlie and Kit, who had developed into young men under the watchful care of two mothers, frequently joined in the laughter that surrounded the dinner table as the evenings came to a close. Here there were only family and love, no flashing cameras or roles to play. Jodie, in the words of Alexandra, carries the weight of the world with such grace. She is, however, just herself in our home, soft, jovial, and unrestrained. It was a life reclaimed, not a performance. Jodie believed that freedom, rather than intensity, was what separated her first and second great loves. She had quietly created a family with Sidney Bernard, keeping her happiness hidden from the outside world. Though it existed behind closed doors and was always shrouded in secrecy, that love had been genuine. She was at last free to live freely with Alexandra, without fear or regret. Jodie once whispered to a friend, "Alexandra gave me the courage to breathe in the sunlight. I no longer feel like I'm hiding with her. I feel at home." Their love was a gentle reminder that happiness is not dependent on permission, not on rebellion. Jodie's life, which involved juggling what the outside world wanted to see with what her soul yearned to show, appeared to be reflected in Alexandra's artwork, which frequently explored themes of visibility and absence, presence and distance. They found balance together. Together they made the decision to only make public appearances when they felt compelled to. It was a silent revolution against the cacophony of celebrity culture, visibility on their own terms. Jodie never wavered in her commitment to being a mother. By using pseudonyms in hospitals and paying schools to keep paparazzi away, she continued to protect Charlie and Kit from the spotlight of public life and make sure her sons could grow up free of the burdens she had carried since she was a young child. She found a partner in Alexandra who honored that commitment, someone who took on the role of companion and guide rather than a substitute. Their blended family served as evidence of the universality, resiliency, and transformation of love in all its manifestations. Jodie Foster and Alexandra Hedison's romance is no longer marked by tabloid controversies or paparazzi photos. Instead, it resides in the silent dignity of two women strolling hand in hand, raising kids, exchanging artwork, and eschewing spectacle in favor of peace. When Jodie finally emerges from decades of darkness, she is healed by love but still bears the scars of her suffering. The greatest battles are not fought on grand stages, but rather in the quiet of kitchens full of laughter, in gardens where people walk hand in hand, and in the simple courage of living without disguise. Perhaps that is the deepest truth her journey offers. Her love doesn't have to shout because it is evident in every decision, every smile, and every free moment. And the greatest victory of all is found in that calm, steady glow, not just in doing or in persevering or even in succeeding, but in being, at last, simply and completely. Alexandra Hedison was the new light that love had brought to Jodie Foster. However, no amount of love can protect us from the ultimate reality of life: loss. Jodie had finally found a home, a partner, and an unshaken family after decades of storms. However, life reminded her of its harshness in ways that were more profound than any rejection from a job or public scrutiny she had ever experienced, just as she was learning to breathe freely in the sunlight. After years of illness and decline, Lucius Foster, her father, passed away in 2016. But the grief was complicated. As a former Air Force colonel who became a broker and left before Jodie was even born, he had always been more of an absence than a presence. In her life, their paths only crossed a few times, each time being courteous but aloof, characterized more by curiosity than closeness. It wasn't the loss of intimacy that hit her when she learnt of his death through family, but rather the silent pain of what never was. She mourned not just the man but also the years that had passed, the unspoken talks, the unformed father-daughter relationship.
She once thought to lose someone who was
never truly yours in the first place is a strange kind of mourning. The anguish persisted not in shrill sobs, but in the quiet of unsolved queries, in the shadow of a hug she had never experienced. Jodie Foster had experienced storms before, but nothing could prepare her for the loss of her mother, Evelyn Brandy Foster, who had supported her through each and every one of them. In 2019, here is your exquisitely composed passage, meticulously edited for spelling, grammar, and punctuation while maintaining your tone, voice, and narrative coherence. No rewording or structural changes were made. Only mechanical and typographic corrections were made. She was adamant that her daughter's brilliance would be safeguarded and never taken advantage of, which is why she packed lunches before sunrise and stayed up past midnight fixing her lines. Brandy was the one to draw the line when producers went too far. Brandy was the one who protected her with silent, unwavering strength when the cameras were shining too brightly. Jodie saw herself as more than just a parent. Her whole life had been constructed around her. The anchor in every storm, the voice in every shadow. Brandy kept her grounded even during her sudden burst of fame. Jodie recalled how her mother insisted that they eat a simple meal at the kitchen table, regardless of how late they got back from set. "You are still a child," she said in this manner. Jodie once said, "You are still mine." There were jokes whispered in the hallways, songs sung over dishwater, and times when Brandy looked at her daughter and firmly but gently reminded her, "Remember to be a kid." When everyone stood up on Oscar night in 1989, Jodie acknowledged that she looked around the audience for her mother's face, the only applause that counted rather than for celebrities. Silence had always been a wound from her father's absence. However, her mother's presence was crucial. It was fierce, unflinching, and loud in its love. Dementia felt so cruel because of this. Long before death arrived, it started stealing, removing memories one by one until the woman who had served as Jodie's compass appeared to be lost in the mists. Jodie subsequently revealed the agony. "I was losing her daily, witnessing the disappearance of the strongest person I had ever known. Nevertheless, I was unable to let her go." On certain days, Brandy's eyes brightened with recognition, and she called Jodie's name with the same warmth as before. On other days, those same eyes seemed to gaze at a stranger through her. Every lapse felt like a knife, and every flash of insight was like sunlight penetrating clouds. Jodie acknowledged that the grief had started long before the end. It was more than just loss when Brandy passed away in 2019. Collapse was the result. Her mother's absence was a roar, in contrast to her father, whose absence had always been an echo. Suddenly the stage went dark. The cheers went silent. The only bond that had ever been unbreakable was being mourned, not a bond that had never existed. Without her mother, everything felt empty, including movie sets, award shows, and even the quiet of her house. Jodie muttered, "I always miss her in ways I can't describe." The role of a daughter, learning to live without her mother's hand on her shoulder, was the one that an actress who had played innumerable female characters on screen could not play to her strengths. With each quiet hour, the grief, which was personal but unrelenting, reshaped her soul. Since the woman who had previously clapped the loudest was no longer there, triumphs now had a somber undertone. Her suffering is painfully familiar to anyone who has experienced the valley of losing a parent. the dinner table's hollow chair. Before realizing there won't be a response, you reach for the phone. The way memories wound and heal in the same heartbeat, Jodie's mourning transformed her into a mirror as well as an actress, demonstrating that even celebrities have a childlike side and are inevitably bonded to their parents. And maybe that's why her story has such a deep resonance. No amount of fame can change the fact that the people who give us life will eventually pass away. This is the truth hidden behind the Oscars, the honors, and the timeless characters. And no amount of love, no matter how intense, can halt time. The most human storm of all was the silence left by her mother's death, which Jodie Foster, the woman who had braved storms of fame, scrutiny, and shadows, now had to face. Even so, she managed to rise above this gloom. Because even though grief changes us, it also serves as a reminder of the enduring nature of love. Even though Brandy's voice has diminished, it is still present in every memory, every scene from Jodie's story, every victory and every wound. Beyond the sadness, a new chapter was ahead. A life in the present that is characterized by fortitude, family, and the serene, radiant beauty of enduring the unimaginable, rather than by absence. A daughter bringing her mother's light into each new day. Jodie Foster, now 62, lives in the softer glow of a life she has chosen for herself rather than the glaring spotlights of Hollywood. Instead of chasing roles, she chooses them with the precision of someone who has nothing left to prove. She splits her time between Los Angeles, New York, and Europe. She sold her stunning 7,500 square foot modernist estate in Beverly Hills, which she had owned for decades and which offered expansive views of the city, for almost $15 million in 2019. Prior to that, she had made investments in a Manhattan apartment and a Spanish-style villa in the Hollywood Hills, both of which were intended to be private retreats. She now lives in a more sedate house nestled in the Los Angeles Hills. Less of a mansion than a haven, it is adorned with books, artwork, and photographs by Alexandra Hedison that shine against the sunlit walls rather than glistening trophies. She has always had a taste for subtle elegance. She now prefers to drive herself in a small electric car through the peaceful streets of Los Angeles, leaving the garages that once housed her Mercedes-Benz and Range Rover largely empty. She has owned a number of opulent properties, including a retreat in the south of France where she goes to read and take walks by the sea. However, rather than being on display, even those houses represent her quest for safety. Jodie is one of the richest people in Hollywood, with an estimated net worth of $100 million. However, wealth has never been quantified for her in terms of money or material belongings. Every home, vehicle, and investment has been less about luxury and more about safety, a means of creating areas of calm in a life that has always been characterized by scrutiny. She maintains that her family that assembles around her dinner table, her autonomy in selecting her projects, and the uncommon peace of being able to refuse requests are her true wealth, rather than the real estate portfolio she has amassed. Today, her life revolves around Alexandra Hedison, her wife since 2014, whose ethereal photographs adorn their home's walls. Their Los Angeles home is more than just a glass and stone building. It serves as a gallery, a haven, and a platform for the silent rites that have taken on a life of their own. In the mornings, Jodie walks the dog slowly through the hills while Alexandra makes coffee, and sunlight streams across framed photos. Dinners they prepare themselves mark the end of the evenings, with laughter resonating among the family members gathered around the table rather than for the cameras. Her sons, Charlie, born in 1998, and Kit, born in 2001, are now young men pursuing their own careers. Jodie is still just mom, the pillar that protected their early years from the confining stare of celebrity. She once used pseudonyms in hospitals to allow her children to be born in peace, paid schools to keep paparazzi off playgrounds, and has always kept their father's identity a secret. Not out of secrecy, but out of intense devotion, determined to allow them to grow up free of her legend. The quiet pride of a mother seeing her son grow up and walk beside her as a man, not a child, was more important than the cameras when Charlie accompanied her at the 2025 SAG Awards. As a professional, she continues to be picky and uses her talent more like a scalpel than a sword. She won a Golden Globe for The Mauritanian in 2021. After months of physical training to mimic Bonnie Stoll's strength, Nayad 2023 earned her a 5th Oscar nomination. In 2025, she won another Golden Globe and an Emmy for True Detective Night Country, 2024. Early critics have hinted that her French-language film, Vie privée, A Private Life, which will make its Cannes premiere, may be one of her most intimate and defining pieces. Jodie, who is 62, defines relevance rather than seeking it. Because she has been disciplined for years and incorporates yoga, swimming, and hiking into her daily routine, her health is stable. She has allowed time to leave its mark on her skin by resisting the urge to change it cosmetically. She once thought, "A face's lines are stories written by time." Those lines on her face are not imperfections, but rather evidence of struggles fought, adversities faced, and joys fiercely embraced. Her legacy extends even farther beyond the screen. Jodie has quietly contributed to and supported causes that are important to her for many years, including the Motion Picture and Television Fund's programs for struggling artists and crews, the Children's Health Fund's Children's Health Initiatives, Stand Up to Cancer's research, and the Motion Picture and Television Fund's advocacy for LGBTQ+ rights. She has supported GIO campaign's work for underprivileged youth worldwide and donated her name and money to AMFAR in the fight against AIDS. Her giving has been consistent, generous, and purposeful according to those close to her, even though she rarely discloses precise numbers. Never spectacle, always accountability. Jodie Foster is more than just a movie legend these days. She is a woman who has forged a life defined by what she created rather than by what was taken. Despite enduring storms of fame, obsession, rejection, and devastating loss, peace, family, and love, her Palme d'Or, Golden Globes, Emmy, and 2 Oscars are all works of art. Her greatest victory, however, is more personal: the bravery to live a truthful life, to love fearlessly, and to walk in the light after decades of darkness. And maybe that's why her story lives on. It is the story of a human being who stumbled, suffered, and got back up again, not of a perfect star, Clarice Starling, Iris, or any of the innumerable female characters Jodie Foster has played on screen have never been her favorite roles. As a woman who is unbroken, unbowed, and unafraid to be authentic, she has played the most important role. Please pay tribute to the actress as well as the spirit she embodies if her journey has moved you, or her bravery has inspired you. Because Jodie Foster leaves us all with an example in addition to her timeless films, being great means learning to weather storms gracefully rather than running away from them.